Hey, Paul, did you know that according to podcastinsights.com, as of January 2021, there are over 1.75 million podcasts, totaling more than 43 million episodes. And those numbers are just on Apple Podcasts. They don't include Spotify or Google Podcasts or other hosting sites. So it's easy to say that creating and posting a podcast has become a very popular way to communicate ideas.
Jason, did you know in 2005, the term podcast earned the title of New Word of the Year by the American Oxford Dictionary? Now it's been 16 years later, and you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who doesn't know what or has listened to a podcast.
Right. The question is no longer, hey, do you know what a podcast is? Rather, it has become, do you have a podcast? In May of 2010, Continuing Education Workforce Training launched CEWT Talk, our own podcast. And we have produced close to 100 episodes spanning over 3 seasons. We've learned a few things along the way, made a few mistakes, and we were thinking, maybe it's time we just share with people what we learned in hopes that they might get help and benefit them as well.
Yeah, in this CEWT Talk special series, a podcast about podcasting by podcasters, essentially is just that, sharing the lessons we have learned in hopes of someone getting benefits or help from our own podcast. This series will consist of 5 parts, and each part is focusing on answering one of the following questions. Why do a podcast? How to do a podcast? Who to do a podcast for, how to host your podcast, and what to do with that podcast once you have it existing.
So we hope that you enjoy this special series of CEWT Talk and that you will find some help in creating your own podcast. Be sure to check out additional episodes in this series and then let us know what you think. Let us know if you've had success, if it was helpful, or if we sent you down the wrong path. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. And so with that all being said, it's time to get started with CEWT Talk. Hello, everyone. This is Jason Batalden, Assistant Director here at Continuing Education Workforce Training. And Paul Dickey's on the show today.
Yes, as always.
As always. You know what? That is true. I tease you probably a little too much, but I shouldn't do that so much because you're really always on the show.
Yes,
in fact, always. Paul, the truth of the matter is every episode that gets posted, you've had a hand in. There has not been an episode where you haven't had a hand in it. So,
well, you know, the thing is, I know there's been once or twice I haven't been here, but that's because of the guests kind of, we need someone else to host. That's the times that Gary will come on and host because he's got something to say or ask the guests specifically. And, too many cooks, man. Sometimes too many cooks, and you don't need 12 people on a podcast.
And what a great segue, Paul, because obviously this is a unique little series that we're put together. And this is the name of this series, of course, is a podcast about podcasting by podcasters. And
it took us all day to think of that
one. Of all the titles we've come up with, I got to say this one I'm probably the proudest of.
Yeah. Well, we had been talking about this series for a little while because when we entered the whole podcast thing, it was kind of like, okay, how do we start this? What do we do? How do we put this together? How should we put this together? So we had lots of questions going into it, and and we've had discussions like before each podcast. Jason and I have a discussion a lot of times, and it's about the process. And one day we were thinking, do you think other people would like to do this, or other people are interested in how to do this? And that's how Jason came up with the idea for this series.
Yeah, right. And and then it's funny too, and that's what the series is about. Is if you're sitting out there listening and you're a regular listener or even a one-time listener to our show, CEWT Talk, and you're going, boy, if these two guys can do a podcast, maybe anybody can.
Anybody can.
Yes, and I don't want to say that's not true. That's absolutely true. But there are some things that you need to ask yourself. and to kind of know what you want to do. And so with this segment, we're going to answer just one of those questions, or at least have a discussion and try to give you some takeaways, to give our audience some takeaways about if they're in that position of thinking, what can we do and how do we start a podcast? And so today's segment, we're going to answer the question, why do a podcast?
Exactly. A lot of people, are listen to podcasts, but they never think about whether they should, because they haven't asked themselves, why should I do a podcast?
Right.
Hasn't occurred to them. And a lot of people who have businesses out there, they might not even have occurred to them that this might be a great way of adding to their business, and haven't asked themselves why.
Right.
And hopefully we can, throw some stuff against the wall and see how it sticks, and answer that question.
That's right. And so to that end, we also want to invite anyone listening to this podcast, please reach out and contact us. Send us some questions. We'll address those questions. And if we feel like we're getting a lot of the same questions about similar questions, I think we'll probably even address them on the show and try to help people out. But Paul brings up a great point. So why do a podcast, right? And you heard him state earlier, Paul, you said it earlier about, whether you're a business or an individual. And that's the neat thing about podcasts, is that they can be used in so many different ways. And so when you're thinking about that question, why podcast, the first question I think you have to answer, and I think for me, Paul, and you might disagree, so I want to hear your feedback on this, but for me, I think the first question you have to answer is why, what is the message or story that you want to tell?
Well, it is important, because people like to hear stories. They like to, if either they want to learn something, or they want it to connect with a subject that they're already interested in. And learning stories or getting information, I think that's why we all listen. But it's also telling a story or providing information. That's why you would do a podcast.
Yeah, right. But I think there's another element, though, to just, if you're just trying to get information. So if you're a business and all you want to do is tell a customer about your product or products, right? It's not an ad. It's not an advertisement, right? You're not trying to, tell people that, where to buy it, how much it costs, and what they can use it for. You want to be able to tell that story or share that message. And if you're an individual, you too have, even if it's something you're interested in, or if it's just something you want to talk about, right? What is the purpose? What is the mission, message that you want to tell? And that has to be, in my opinion, kind of the driving question, because that's the thing that's going to hold you accountable to your podcast, right? So you don't get 4 episodes in and next thing you're talking about underwater basket weaving when, you have nothing. You know what I mean?
Maybe someone's interested in underwater basket weaving.
But that should be, that should be why you're getting into podcasting, right? You don't want to get into podcasting to let somebody know about a service you provide, or share, a story that you're interested in, and then get so far off topic that 4 episodes in, next thing you know, you're just scrambling to come up with something to talk about to keep your podcast going.
Well, also, I think it's an opportunity for an individual or a business to demonstrate that they are knowledgeable, or that they are informative about a particular subject. When you do that, when you inform, share your knowledge, what you're doing is you're creating trust with the listener.
Yep.
And they look at you as an expert in that field.
Right.
Regardless whether it's as simple as, hey, I'm doing movie criticisms, or I'm giving some advice about how to cook.
Right.
They look at you, and they if the information that you're providing has some value, they begin to look at you as the expert and give you trust. And then they will share that knowledge with other people, and also tune back in.
Right. Well, I mean, think about your comment about trust brought up a really interesting memory for us. So one of our first episodes in our Sweet Talk podcast, we did with an individual, Stephanie Pelagi, with historic downtown Pocatello. And she was like one of the first guests we ever interviewed, right? Our first guest that we ever had on the show. And I'll never forget, just the look on her face. You are our first guest. You're welcome to our studio. Back when we did the podcast in the studio, and sit her down, mic her up, and begin the conversation. And she didn't have any background about what our show was supposed to be about, or we had no previous episodes to listen to. So just think about the risk that she had to take to sit down on our show. And I'm forever grateful for her for that, because, at the end of the show, I think she would say she had a really good time, a good experience. And I think she was, we didn't violate her trust by, having her, we, and that made the difference. So that trust goes two ways, right? It goes two ways, not only for those who listen, but your guests have to trust you too, a little bit.
Well, and you bring up a good point, because previously I said about a person sharing their knowledge and experiences, whereas you could be like us, right, the host of the show, and bring people in to that will share their knowledge and experience.
Right.
So it's, you could be the curator of sharing that knowledge and experience, and have your guests on, and they're the ones who can tell their story.
Yeah, right. So it's almost like I like your word curator, but it's also like a facilitator, right? That you've created a platform that guests then can come on and talk about our show, or talk about what they want, right? And what is important to them. But still that question of why podcast. So let's kind of back up a little bit. Why do we do Sweet Talk? Why did we start Sweet Talk? Well, the idea came out of necessity, or out of need. Back when I had first started working for Sweet, we still run the video segments. We haven't in a while, but thanks to COVID. But we had this special feature that was called Entrepreneur Highlights. And an Entrepreneur Highlight is a video that we post to YouTube. And we featured businesses in Southeast Idaho that were entrepreneurial. Important thing too, all right, is make sure you can speak the English language. But anyway, or whatever language your podcast is in. But but just the process, right, of getting the guest into the studio, filming that experience, and then then editing that, and then sending that back out for approvals, and then making any necessary changes. We were up against significant timelines, because these were things that we wanted to feature in a monthly newsletter, and we kept running up against those issues.
Yeah, I mean, we would constantly, that's my fault.
Well, you know what, Paul?
I would constantly miss my deadlines, because we are trying to put things together, but also do our other duties at Sweet as well. And I go, hey, I would like to have this for the newsletter. Jason says, I'd like to have this newsletter. Well, this must be nice to want.
Yeah, wants are one thing, Jason. Well, you used the word, that was my fault. Well, I just want to make sure that wasn't a fault issue, right? Again, that was just the process, and I'm going to use your famous word, the workflow of getting those videos done. First of all, scheduled, recorded, edited, and then, into the final form, and then posted. I mean, there's built-in timeframes that just can't be adjusted in that kind of process. And what ended up happening is that, there's 12 months in a year. We do a monthly newsletter that limited us to 12 entrepreneur highlights. And the reality was there are a lot more people that we wanted to have conversations with than just 12 people.
Oh yeah, I mean that's you're right. I mean it was limited, and because it was limited, if I missed a due date for the newsletter, then we suffer from that loss of not being able to include it in the newsletter. And also, there were lots of people, and not just entrepreneurs, but people within the community that we run into all the time. People who work with us at CEWT, providing us some help within the community. People in the community that we want people to know about and inform them of their services or maybe charity that they provide.
Sure.
I think that was your whole thing is, why just stick to entrepreneurs? We should be reaching out to our community, and why do a podcast? Well, to make connections in your community,
right? And to, for us, why doing the podcast came down to answering that, or we wanted to share the message that here at Continuing Education Workforce Training. Our message is we do a lot of different things to help the community, and we wanted to let the community know what was going on, right, and how we can help. And so it was sort of that double-edged sword, to speak. I guess that might even be the wrong analogy a little bit, but not only did we want to have entrepreneurs and nonprofits. I mean, I think we've just finally narrowed it down to difference makers, people, organizations, businesses, nonprofits that are making a difference in our community. And we wanted to give them an opportunity to share their platform, share their message. And we wanted at the same time to let people know, that's what we do at CEWT. We are working to help people make a difference in this community. Yeah. And that's the message. So, there it is. That's the answer to the question. What's the message that the story wanted to tell? We wanted to tell the stories of, have people tell their great stories and share their message. And also, in conjunction with our messages, we're working hard to make a difference in people's lives so that they can make a difference in the community. And so that answers that kind of first question, right? That's the story.
Right. And, it also served as another point is it helped to create awareness of our department in the community ourselves, because we were having guests on from the community. A lot of those guests you reached out to have never heard of us before or didn't know what we did. And now that they do. And some of those guests actually came and agreed to teach classes for us.
Sure. And we've partnered with them in different ways, right? To either help them, get their message out to, their customers or their supporters, or we've partnered with them in a lot of different ways. And I think that has been beneficial. So, creating that awareness. But again, that was the message we want to tell. And when you start your own podcast, you have to come up with that idea. Is what do I want to say? What is the message? What is the story you want to tell? And then the neat thing about that is it kind of segues into the next piece is then, who do you want to tell the message to? Or who do you want to share the story with? And so once we made that determination that this is the message we want to share and the messages that we want to communicate, then you kind of have to ask that question is, who do you want to tell the story to? Because that's important. I mean, you could have the great story, the best story in the whole world, but if you don't tell it, have an idea who you want to tell that story to, it isn't going to work.
Right. I mean, I think we were initially wanted to tell our story to people in our local community. Mm-hmm. I think initially, but then, a lot of our stories from our guests actually, resonated with a wider audience as well.
Right.
Not just what's happening in and around us, but also these stories. For instance, I go back to one story is the woman who was on that talked about bats.
It's my favorite podcast.
So we brought her in as kind of a lark because it was a Halloween episode, but she talked about bat habitats, tracking bats, counting them, and doing all that scientific research on bats, which I think had a much wider resonance than just our local community. I think that actually became a popular episode that people are still tuning into now just to get some information. And she was very, very informative. And that's another thing. Another reason to do a podcast is you could learn something.
Right. Well, and it goes down to that bigger word, networking, right? So, when you bring guests, we had a specific target when we started this podcast of, okay, all we're really worried about is the local Southeast Idaho neighborhoods, right? And how it directly connected with CEWT or with ISU or the College of Tech at ISU and along those lines. But, as we moved out, the stories they had to tell were bigger than just our local community. And that was a neat little perk that I don't think we planned on, but it was sure neat, right? Just to see that how those stories went beyond just Southeast Idaho.
Right. So, let's touch base again. We decided what the message was or the stories we wanted to tell, and then we decided what audience that we wanted to tell them to. But it kind of grew beyond that because the stories that we had actually reached a wider audience than our intention, which is was a plus for us.
Right. And that kind of goes then back into the next question, right? Is one of the things you've got to decide when you're trying to say, okay, why do a podcast is the podcast platform is the best way to communicate this message. And I'm going to throw this out, Paul. So you disagree with me and we can discuss this.
Yes.
My argument would be is if you determine the message that you want to tell and you have a target audience to whom you want to tell it, but you can communicate that message using a different medium than a podcast, then I would argue don't do a podcast.
Well, I think you're right. It depends. Here's the thing. If we were going to do we're an educational department at a university. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our stuff that we do is we're conveying a message through a lot of online classes or face-to-face classes. So that's a little different because what we're doing is we're educating, we are delivering a message, but those type of messages are best suited to a class.
Right.
Why a podcast? Well, podcast I think is a little more intimate. You're telling a story and you're telling a message, and I think it's on a more personal level than, say, a classroom.
Right.
The thing is when a lot of people, when they're listening to a podcast, they're wearing headphones, and they're listening to that, and that message is like up close and personal. You have that message whispering in your ear, right. And you can establish, I think, a more intimate relationship with your listener on a podcast than you can, say, with a class or a face-to-face class or an online class. I think that conveying that in speech in a podcast directly relates to a lot of your listeners.
Right on. So let me give you a couple. I agree 100% with that, first of all, right? And I think what's interesting is the people who give me feedback about our CEWT Talk podcast, they really do enjoy our show. And here's a characteristic flaw of mine. I'm always like, really? Because I enjoy the show. Well, I enjoy the show, but I find it surprising that other people do. You know what I mean? It's just a weird phenomenon, and that's a personal fault of mine.
Again, when we first started this podcast, we were reaching out to community difference makers, right. Getting them on the show, listening to their message, and we live in this community,
right?
And we met them in person when we first started, and we had conversations prior to actually sitting down for the podcast, and I think that we enjoyed connecting with them, but I don't know what anticipation we had in connecting with our audience. And you're right. I mean, we've had a lot of responses where they actually enjoy the podcast. They enjoy, listening to the show, listening to us repeatedly, which I do not understand that at all.
Right. Well, right.
But I think go back to that message and trust and that intimacy when people are listening. I think that's how you develop a relationship with your audience.
Right. Well, right. And so let me back up for just a minute. Go back to this question. Like, so if we can communicate a message through a different format, then don't podcast. So let me give you for an example what I'm talking about here. And this would be a great idea for a podcast. So if someone's out in this industry, I think this would be a wonderful idea. I'm sure someone's already doing it. So let's say that I'm selling RVs, right? Let's say that I'm in the business of selling RVs, right? Now, I can tell people to come look at my RV, buy my, why it's a good price, why it's a good product, and, tell them that they're going to have a great time, dragging that trailer around or driving that motorhome around with their family. But like a podcast, so if your only goal is to sell, RVs, then don't waste your time doing a podcast. But, an interesting podcast would be, right, is to have a RV company invite back their customers a year later and say, hey, share us the story about you and your family or what you did with your RV last year, right? And so the primary goal message you want to communicate there is have people talk about their RV. Now that I would say, and then, the secondary message would be is to encourage people to come in and buy an RV from you. But do you see what I'm saying? That's what I'm talking about when I say if your message and what your purpose don't line up with telling a story, then don't do a podcast.
And I think you're absolutely 100% correct. I mean, and that example is perfect because you have an RV company, and you're not talking RVs for a half hour. What you're doing is you're talking about the fun people are having with the RV for a half hour.
Sure.
You're basically making it on a more personal level, creating a story of their family and the fun that they had. And, if your purpose is to create a podcast to sell RVs, telling the story will lead to the sales.
Right. Well, that's what we believe, right?
And that's what. And again, going back to way back when I started, is you also want to create that that narrative that you are the knowledgeable person, the people who know what they're doing, right. And you can pepper that in with your stories, but trust. You're trying to create that trust, that intimate connection with your listener, to create that trust so they keep coming back. Because all in all, a podcast is social media.
Yep.
You're creating content, and you want people to look for you. Because right. How do we all find our podcasts because we go to the search engine, we type in something that we're interested in, it pops up, and we said, okay, I'll give these guys a try. Most podcasts are not bombarding people with advertisement to listen. They're creating the content, hoping that people will find them. And right. If people find you and it's the content that they want to listen to, they will stick around.
Sure. I mean, go back to like door-to-door sales, right? Why do the majority of us hate people who knock on our door and try to sell us something, right? Because they're interrupting what I've got going on at the house, right? They're imposing. But the nice thing about podcasts is they're inviting you. That's it. They are inviting you to come into their space. And all you've done is just created it. You've put it out there where it's accessible in public. And then someone comes up and says, hey, I'm going to spend some time with you. And here we go. And they hit the play button. But that kind of leads to probably another segment that we want to talk about this. But you keep going back to the trust thing. And I guess that didn't really dawn on me, Paul, until you vocalized it earlier, that the trust that we're building with our listeners is extremely, extremely important to a successful podcast. And here's the question: Are you willing to invest? So, are you willing to invest in helping people learn to trust you? And that's so why the podcast? Well, what's the message? What's the story you want to tell? to whom do we want to tell it? And maybe even if I were to put another little bullet on there would be, are you willing to invest time, energy, and yourself, right, to help your listeners trust you? And that's a little risky. That's a little risky.
Well, and because part of that trust is consistency.
Part of that trust is consistency.
Knowing that you're going to be there. And there's something very comforting. I don't know about you, but there's something very comforting when every week a new episode of my favorite podcast pops up into my feed.
Yep.
I can listen to this. I can't wait to listen to this. And you either listen to it your drive, or you listen at night before you turn in, or you're going to listen to it on your free time, maybe even while you're cooking dinner. I'm going to listen to my podcast. But it's very comforting knowing that it's a regular thing each week that they come. So consistency also matters when it comes, because again, it's about that trust, making people know that you're going to be there.
Right. And so again, these are topics where we're going to dive into later on in more segments. But, so again, just why podcast? And so I think we've nailed those down pretty good, except for the one last question you really need to ask yourself: why you want to podcast. And this kind of goes into, maybe I'm jumping ahead, Paul, so you can tell me we do this, but you got to have at least, before you make that decision to do a podcast, you kind of have to ask yourself, all right, am I able to make the podcast, right? And we'll go into more deep detail about what that means. What do you have to have in place to build a podcast and to record a podcast and to post a podcast? But you got to have that question right up front. We went into Gary's office when we had this idea to do CEWT Talk, and I remember that was one of the first questions is, can you do a podcast? And I know I'm misquoting you a little bit, but you basically said, Gary, we do it already. We're already doing a podcast every time we record Entrepreneur Highlight. Every time we do a Faces of CEWT, which were these video staples that we put into our YouTube channel about us, we literally were creating a podcast. There's the equipment. Did we already have a social media presence on, that would help people find us? And ultimately, do you have the personnel, not only in the talent, but does the talent have the time? And Paul, by the way, I'm not calling you and I talent at all. but do you have someone that can sit and carry on a conversation? And that takes a skill too. So.
Yeah. So again, I think we've answered a bunch of questions on why podcast, creating awareness of your company, of you or your company, sharing some interests and expertise, community outreach, networking. I know on our podcast, each week we learn a new thing.
Oh my goodness.
And which is great, because we're learning as we record these podcasts, so that people listening to us are learning new things. And it amazes me sometimes, the guests that we have on our show and what they do in our community. Really, sometimes I'm just shocked by things like the gentleman who we had on, who was building bikes for people who are disadvantaged or homeless. And
lowrider,
man, tears in my eyes on that one. That
guy was incredible.
Yeah,
he's an incredible guy.
Yeah, and but the one thing that we haven't, and I think maybe you did touch on this just a tiny bit, is why do a podcast? Because it's fun.
Yeah, they are fun. They are. And have we ever had a guest that didn't say they had fun on our show?
I don't think so. I mean, we've had guests that when we used to come into the studio pre-COVID, we would have guests and they would be so nervous coming in, and then we'd record the segment, and then they'd get up and go, "That was fun." I mean, sometimes they'd finish up and the look on their face was just this ecstatic, like they had such a good time because, what we're doing is we would ask them come on the show and talk about what they know.
Right. Right.
And, and in most cases, if you ask people about the subject that they know, you can't stop them. You can't stop them. It just flows out. And because of the format that we picked, the 20-minute conversation, it goes by so fast every week. And it's just amazing how animated some of the guests were. And we'd finish each segment and go, that was fun. Right. And here's the thing. When Jason first approached Gary with this idea about doing the podcast, and I've said this before on previous episodes, is Gary was like, why? Why would we do that?
Why?
Can we do that? Why would we do that? And he just was not sold on it. It's been how many episodes, Jason?
Well, I mean, recorded episodes, I think we're close to 100.
Yeah. So after like 100 episodes, I can tell you right now, he would never give it up.
No.
He would never get up because he has fun when he's on. He also listens to the show and he enjoys the show every week. And also he understands the benefit of reaching out to the community and meeting new people that are in our community. Right. And I don't think he'd ever get up. And I don't think we really would ever give it up.
No, they're here to stay, and we'll continue to produce shows as long as someone will listen to them, and we'll get into this later too. But when you initially start a podcast, that number is pretty low.
Yeah,
the number of people listening is a pretty small number.
we will definitely get into that. We'll talk about social media and get into that because I mean this is part of a series and we're going to have more parts.
Right. So, I think ultimately what I would just want to put out there kind of as we kind of killed this, we kind of ran this topic down a little bit is why podcast. And, there are several reasons and that you should, if it is the right fit for you. But I would also encourage is that if the last thing that you're thinking is that maybe, no one wants to hear what I have to say, or I'm just not that interesting, or, if it's just that anxieties, that sort of stage, fright anxiety, I'm going to just encourage you to do whatever you need to do to kind of get over that because the process of doing a podcast is not it's fun, it's educational, and it works. And I'll say it works both in the short term and in the long term. Short-term probably benefits is that it gets your message out. It helps you refine what you're trying to communicate and tell. It helps you identify those in your community who want to hear what you have to say or want to hear what your guests have to say, and that type of thing. But in the long term, it's permanent content. Right. Especially if you're a business, right? If you run an ad, that ad falls off Facebook, that ad goes out of the paper, that ad stops as soon as the radio spot, as soon as you're done paying for it. Well, podcast content, as long as you pay for the website to upload your shows to, that's permanent content that's always there. And so, that's a value there too. But again, those are probably topics, Paul, for our next segment.
Yeah, and that's I think definitely explaining how that works, how content works, and how what that does to search engines and so forth like that. We can touch base on that and give a little more insight to that because again, I'm sure a lot of people listening going, why podcasts? Because what does it do for me? And we did touch on this, but one of the other things is how it affects you, your social media. Presence.
Yes, it does. It has an impact. But I, you know what? I would say though, don't let that be the why on the front end.
No.
On the front end, why really focus on the message, and telling the story. That truly is. That truly is the most important part. And if you're passionate about your story, if you're passionate about your message, that will come across, and that goes to building trust, right? And Paul, that's such a great point. Building trust with your listeners, and then building trust with your guests.
I think if your point is to chase after social media numbers, I can tell you right now, you're going to peter out really fast.
Right. Because they're not there. They're not there on the front end.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, we'll cover this in a different episode, but yeah, that is not the reason to start. It is a good, benefit later on, but that's not the reason to start.
That's not. So, Paul, do you think we dragged this one down? Do you think we nailed the Why podcast down?
I think so. I think at least we started the discussion and maybe hopefully put a buzz in some people's ear on thinking about it. But if they have any additional questions or comments, they could definitely email at us at cetrain@isu.edu. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions that you have or any comments would be really helpful to us for future episodes.
Yep. And, you can always comment on any of our podcasts wherever you listen to them, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or SoundCloud or Apple Podcasts. Leave a comment. We'll definitely get back to you too. Reach out to us on Facebook. Reach out to us on Instagram. But we'd love to have this conversation with you. Why podcast? So with that being said, Paul, we do know we have several more segments coming forward.
Oh, yeah.
Or yet to listen to. So you be sure to check back and to follow us along and let us know how you feel.
Yes, please.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Good job.
Yeah, thanks.